Hi, everyone. My name is Shivali Verma, and I'm an associate scientist working in early discovery at GentiBio, a Boston-based biotech firm. I made the move from academia to industry about a year ago, having had no prior exposure to the biotech industry or private sector at all. And so today, it is my pleasure to share what my experience was like navigating that transition, moving from academia to the private sector into biotech. So looking back, there were actually quite a few draws for me to make the move into biotech. But funnily enough, even though I have been working in labs now for upwards of 7 years, I didn't really consider that biotech might be the right move for me until about 2 years ago when I was towards the tail end of my undergraduate degree at Columbia. I was working in an immunology lab at the time, and we had an extremely collaborative culture. And I just really enjoyed being able to work not simply siloed on my own, driving one project and one question, but working alongside others, taking the expertise that I had built in my project and being able to help out and apply those skills to other questions that we were asking in the lab, and then that grew to collaborations outside my lab as well. And I think just realizing how much I loved working in a team was one of the big motivators for me to look into industry. The other thing that I very much value in my current role is being able to see my science and its ability to impact patients. To know that the science that we do in industry can actually reach the clinic much faster and lead to be it drug development or cell therapy, to actually help people. That was also a very big draw for me. And finally, I personally thrive in fast-paced environments, and from what I had heard, biotech was all about that. So I was thrilled to maybe look a little bit deeper and see if there were any other qualities that called out to me, and fortunately, there were. Realizing I was interested in biotech was definitely the easier part, whereas further exploring that interest and defining for myself what a career in biotech really looks like, what do people do on a day-to-day basis, that definitely came with a lot more challenges. And I think that's owing mainly to what we all have experienced in academia, of there being sort of a disconnect between the private sector and academia. There is a very different way of doing science, and there's not a lot of cross communication unless you so happen to be working in a lab where your PI or a PI you collaborate with also collaborates outside of academia with industry. And so this is the part where I have a lot of my peers to thank, and my lab mates and my mentors, and my even my PI who eventually connected with me with resources. So the biggest piece of advice I can give here is put yourself out there and talk to as many people as you can. That's exactly what I did as well. I went to my mentor who had been toying with the idea of going into industry for quite a while. He was able to give me his knowledge and his research, that I then dug into on my own as well, looking into companies, looking into products, looking into what kind of science is making headlines, and trying to infer some wisdom about what that really means biotech looks like right now. That was sort of more high level, but what was much more useful really was my lab mates who went out of their way to try and then connect me to their friends who worked in industry or friends of friends. And then those conversations were really where I learned so much more about not only what a day-to-day looks like in biotech, but what skills are valued. And so it opened me up to a whole new way in which science can be done. Um, and that only really further piqued my interest and curiosity in the industry, but was definitely the most valuable source of knowledge for me is putting myself out there and being lucky enough that I was able to speak with people who were currently working in biotech. If you are not able to find those resources, another great way sort of gain that exposure yourself is if if your school has an undergraduate college affiliated, there are oftentimes open houses where companies will come in and give presentations about what working there would be like. I would encourage you to go out and attend those. I definitely did some of those myself. And the other thing that I'll quickly mention is it is a little bit more rare, but typically in an institution, it's not uncommon for there to be one or two PIs, even if you don't directly work with them, who are involved in collaborations with industry. These people can be an invaluable resource in not only giving you insight into what industry is like, but giving you sort of a culture litmus test, as well as their own perspective on how you might be able to do your transition from academia to industry. So one thing that I highly recommend is workshopping your resume with someone who has worked in industry or is currently working in industry. These people clearly have a more current view of what is actually desirable, what skills shine the most, and what companies are looking for in biotech. And they can also sort of help to almost look at your own experience and guide you towards what roles would better fit you. And so that's definitely something that I did when I was trying to, first of all, establish new relationships with people in biotech. I would always take my resume with me. And so this set me up for in a better position when I later wanted to ask people's advice and their time to help me workshop my resume. Another thing that I will say is reading job descriptions can be a very, at the beginning, maybe tedious, but extremely, extremely helpful task. I won't say that in the first 5 or even 10 job descriptions that I read, I was able to come away with an understanding of what that role would really look like on the day to day. But by the time you've read through 50 or 60 of these, you're starting to see certain buzzwords pop up, and you're maybe noticing what's not there. And this can really help you to understand whether the role is, more individual or collaborative, whether it's more supportive or individual project based, whether, it really allows you to grow one skill in depth, or whether you'll be able to gain breadth. And so I would highly, highly recommend, even if you're looking at companies that are maybe in a city you don't want to move in. I think it still can be extremely useful to just as practice, read through these job descriptions and see what you can come away with. And similarly, I would say it definitely helped me to cast a very, very wide net. There were maybe some cities that I wouldn't have moved to, and I, was still interviewing with these places. But through that, through that experience, I was able to speak to so many new people who were actually working in the industry I wanted to work in. I was able to learn more from during my couple months of interviewing process than I probably did in the entire 2 years previous. So I think actually one of the more common challenges people face when they move from academia to industry is learning to work not just as an individual contributor, but as a team player, as one unit in a larger machine. And that's definitely something that I am continuing to learn and improve at, even as someone who really enjoys collaborating as I do. So that's something I'm sure I'll continue to learn throughout my career. But I would say one thing that I didn't really realize before I joined industry is how pivoting can be important as a skill. So what I mean by that is that in academia, it's often the case that we spend a lot of time, multiple years, working on a single project. And maybe, we switch gears once or twice in between, but for the most part, we continue to work on a certain question for several years on end. And so we can, sort of form an attachment to one area of science, which is beautiful. What I've noticed in industry is because of the fast pace and the evolving atmosphere of what is needed by healthcare, by patients, and so on, what you're working on can actually very quickly change. And so, what I actually learned in my first year of working is the projects that we're working on build skills that then can be transferable, outside of a certain niche, outside of a certain area of science. And that was challenging to me at first, learning to be able to, move on from one area of science to another. Um, Even if they were, very closely adjacent. But it's something that I've come to appreciate with time, because it actually allows me to have a larger breadth of science that I'm exposed to, which is, a wonderful thing to have early in your career. If there was only one piece of advice that I could give you today, it would be to allow yourself to fail. Be graceful with yourself. Recognize that this is a difficult process. This transition is not trivial. It is extremely tough, no matter how early or how late into your career you are. So, allowing yourself to fail actually means setting yourself up for success in the best way possible. Be graceful, be kind to yourself, and do what you need to do in order to fail miserably without fear. For me, that meant trying to apply to things a year early, even when I was still in college, and I failed. But it gave me the practice I needed to, go in with that second round fear free. And similarly, remember that it's not just about getting the role. Once you are in your first role in biotech, you will continue to learn, and that means you'll make mistakes. So choose an environment where you feel comfortable to make mistakes, where you feel supported by the people around you, and know that when you fail, it's not negative.